So if there is one news story that has defined the week, certainly has been the resignation of Malusi Gigaba as Home Affairs Minister and Member of Parliament. And of course, at the State Commission inquiry, former Public Enterprises Minister Barbara Hogan testifying, as well as the former head of Government Communication and Information System, or GCIS, Mzwanele Jimmy Manyi, who had the opportunity to clarify SMSs he sent to acting head of GCIS, Phumla Williams. Glynnis Breytenbach withdrew her name as a candidate to head up the National Prosecuting Authority. There's lots more we're going to talk about that happened in the week. And with us is Karyn Maughan, who is a legal journalist at Tiso BlackStar. Good to have you. Welcome to Morning Live.
Yes, it's my first time. It's
great
to be here.
Hey, welcome. And I hope it's definitely not your last time. So let's start picking your brain. This week, Malusi Gigaba stealing the show, no doubt.
Well, I mean, it was a pretty big move. He has been someone who we know through the Gupta leak emails, for example, has been seen as this person that has been part of either, unconsciously or consciously, the state capture machinations. He is someone who was chosen to replace Pravin Gordhan. Apparently, former President Jacob Zuma wanted Brian Molefe, but Gigaba was sort of a conduit between the two factions, the SACP. He's a controversial figure. He has, in the recent weeks, of course, that infamous video, the finding of the court that he had been dishonest, the public protector then saying that he needed to be sanctioned by President Cyril Ramaphosa. Everything coming down on his head. We know that there was certain pressure on him, and eventually making the decision to resign. And I think also taking a lot of sleepless nights away from President Ramaphosa, because the possibility of actually firing him in an environment where the DA is literally litigating to force the president to fire Gigaba would have been very, very problematic for him politically.
Yeah. I mean, there's an article now with sources speaking in the Citizen, basically saying, don't think this is the last of Malusi Gigaba's political career, because there may be deals happening behind the scenes with him and Ramaphosa, promising him very big positions after the 2019 elections. All of this to not let him to go into the sort of Zuma camp that is still very much so there. I mean, do you read anything into that? Do you think there could be a discussion?
I think I think that pathology is evident, and I think political commentators have pointed this out. We have seen a recycling of people who will sort of disappear amid controversy and then re-emerge in quite lucrative posts. We only have to think about Bruce Kulwane, who was at the heart of the Gupta landing saga at Waterkloof, who was then moved to a very nice ambassadorial position. So there has been that pathology. We have seen people, like, for example, your Brian Molefe's, going from Transnet to Eskom, those kind of positions, people who are quite controversial, who re-emerge in another position in a kind of different life. Gigaba, it's a lot to give up. It's a ministerial salary, it's all that protection, it's status. So one would imagine that, having a family, just on a human level, that in order to make that deal happen, there would be negotiations. We know with, for instance, Tom Moyane, the SARS commissioner, that before the suspension and all of those things played out, there were overtures of a settlement offer to make him just say, just go away quietly, we can organize this, we can give you this money, we can do whatever. So I think Ramaphosa understands that ugly, big legal political fights are not what he needs right now, and possibly sweetening the deal along the way, though that is unconfirmed at this stage, is something that he should be doing.
Yeah. All right, let's move away from the Gigaba story and turn to state capture, because I know you've even written quite an interesting column in the Business Day about that. But before we look at what to expect coming up, because I think you focus on the first time we're going to see cross-examinations. That's going to be interesting. But I want to talk about this week. And first up, let's focus on Jimmy Manyi for a second. And we saw Justice Zondo allowing Mzwanele Manyi the opportunity to clarify SMSs he sent to Phumla Williams at the GCIS. What did you make of this?
I think it was a very important and very strategic move by the DCJ. I think there's, we've seen people like Black First, Land First come to this commission, raise concerns or protest outside, effectively, angry about the bank's evidence. There's been this rhetoric, this kind of binary environment that's created around the state capture inquiry that, you're either on the side of so-called white monopoly capital or you're on the side of the state capture, the state capturers. And I think it's very important for DCJ Zondo to really try and navigate between those binaries and say, ultimately, this commission is about getting to the truth. And we don't just take, evidence. We will allow people to come in, to give their side of the story. We will show them the respect. We will not, and I think with Mzwanele Manyi, he was given a notification from the lawyers for the commission saying you can come. He avails himself, and it's a misunderstanding, and the DCJ said it was regrettable. But I think strategically, had he not allowed him the space to give that testimony, which will be subjected to quite intense cross-examination, I am very sure.
Indeed.
It would have been perceived by certain quarters as him not allowing people who tell a different story to the main witnesses so far to give their side of the story. And I think he played a very, very important strategic card here, and I think it was the right decision.
He certainly did. And I mean, the things that he was saying and the pictures that he was painting, I mean, in terms of GCIS being a mini VBS when he came into the position.
Well, I think comparing it, it's in his version, it's like under 7 million rand to, 2 billion.
Yeah.
But I think the thing is that we as a country have had a very unfortunate pathology of massive kind of financial irregularity in all aspects of government. And I think that, what will be interesting is I think as this inquiry proceeds, we may see that, the Guptas were essentially taking advantage of a compromised immune system. They were, you could argue that they were a disease we got because our immune system was so compromised in terms of proper financial oversight, implementation of the PFMA, holding people accountable with money was misspent. So that kind of evidence, though, we don't know what Phumla Williams will say about it or how it will be responded to, how it will be interrogated, how truthful it is, I think speaks to a wider pathology of financial mismanagement within government. And I think we will very well may see more of this coming out as people come to refute the allegations against them and essentially throw mud in the other direction.
Yeah, right. Barbara Hogan, let's look there, because Barbara Hogan not holding back at all. She, in my opinion, was quite emotional during this time, because it was almost like this was her moment to talk about what was happening during her tenure, really giving us her insights into state capture, particularly in these state-owned enterprises, and the election of different heads of state-owned entities and how this went about, all against her will, against the boards, also accusing the President Jacob Zuma of not understanding his executive powers. She had a lot to say.
I mean, there has been this rhetoric about this is not about putting the ANC on trial, but I mean, one of the most important things that I think came out of this, was speaking about this issue of people being deployed into various positions and the ANC taking an active involvement in that, and the deployment of people into positions where there were other far more fit and proper candidates in her view, and in the view of people involved in the process. But they were essentially sidelined because the president was fixated on a particular person, in this instance, Siyabonga Gama. Now we know that Zizi Kodwa said that the ANC will be making submissions this year to the state capture inquiry through Gwede Mantashe on this issue of the banks, but also on this issue of how they were allegedly, on Barbara Hogan's version, involving themselves in the appointment of pivotal figures within the state-owned enterprises. And I mean, this is such a big issue because state-owned enterprises pose and continue to pose such a massive risk and also incredible financial possibility to the South African economy. And so the appointment of people within those structures is really something that the entire country, should be invested in. And you want the best people for the job. You want people with integrity, skills. And, in the case of Mr. Maseko, who was sort of sidelined, as it were, for that position, which Mr. Gama actually eventually got, this was someone who did so profoundly well within Telkom, who really, improved that business, offered a great deal. And one has to wonder that if those choices had been made, we're going to put the best person in the position, we're going to really exercise accountability and oversight in this situation, how different our state-owned enterprises would be. And I think that kind of evidence that Hogan brought into this environment of that kind of political machination behind the scenes, I think is going to be a constant theme that is going to come through. But I think it's also something that the ANC has to deal with, when it testifies before this commission. Yeah,
and also you talk about the ANC, and I think she also gave a bit of a picture as to what she went through within the ranks of the ANC. And she spoke from a very personal level, as she gave us her credentials, what she had done for the fight for freedom and liberation here in South Africa, and then how it was all kind of turned against her because she didn't want to toe the line. And that, I think, is something that's been quite interesting to listen to. I don't want to dwell too much about it because we have heard quite a bit on that. But what I want to do is touch a little bit about what's going to happen next week, because these cross-examinations are the first we're going to be seeing. Talk to us about this.
So this is what's so interesting, is that we're going to, have obviously Mzwanele Jimmy cross-examined on the 23rd of November. And I think it's a real opportunity for the Commission to demonstrate that, it's used things like the Gupta leaks, it's really done its investigations, it's spoken to other people, and really come at him and say, interrogate him about this rhetoric that he was in fact Mr. Clean. He was the person who came to GCIS and really transformed what he's described as a vulnerable to corruption institution that he was trying to transform. Of course, Phumla Williams' evidence very much being that he restructured GCIS in the way that it did to remove blockages to potentially the Gupta media enterprises getting, state government advertising. So I think it's going to be about details. I think it's going to be about looking at things like the Gupta leaks, looking at Mzwanele Jimmy's role within all of this, and really interrogating him about very specific issues, because his evidence was, he's produced this National Treasury report, he's made certain averments about Phumla Williams, but I think the inquiry will obviously consult with her and then try and really go push him on that version as much as they will need to then bring Phumla Williams back, I think, and interrogate her on hers. Fascinating, and I think this is the one that everyone's waiting for, is late, subsequent to that, we're going to see the cross-examination of Mcebisi Jonas, former Deputy Finance Minister, the first witness in the state capture inquiry, the person who literally came forward in the public domain and said, I was offered this position by a Gupta brother, and actually sparked former Public Protector Thuli Madonsela's investigation. We know Duduzane Zuma and Fanat Longwane, former arms deal advisor, completely refute his claims, say that, this was a meeting about some blackmail speculation about Fanat Longwane, and Rajesh Gupta walked into the room, walked out. So we could not have two more different versions of what happened there, and it's going to be fascinating to see how these lawyers seek to pick Jonas's evidence apart.
And it's also, the Guptas are not allowed to do the cross-examination, is what we've learnt as well. We can't ignore the fact that Pravin Gordhan, in fact, I thought he was going to be the person who stole the week for us, but I think Gigaba pipped him to the post on that one. But he's going to steal next week, but he still had a very difficult week as well. He met with the Public Protector, and he's going to appear before the Commission. So talk to us about what's going on with Pravin Gordhan.
Well, fascinatingly, we know as well that the former NDPP, Sean Abrams, now wants to give evidence about Pravin Gordhan's testimony. Now, Pravin Gordhan has, gone into great detail about his time at Finance Minister, but he's also, this issue of the Public Protector, Busisiwe Mkhobane's investigation, which came at the time when he was going to give evidence. She's denied that there's anything questionable about that, but she has said that she's doing a preliminary investigation into matters related to that entire so-called SARS rogue unit saga, where she's basically said that, Minister Gordhan was clear that the NPA withdrew all the charges against him literally within, less than 2 weeks after instituting those charges against him in relation to an early retirement payout that was given to Ivan Pillay, the SARS commissioner. Now, she says she's looking at issues of maladministration around that, following a complaint, and she's still in the preliminary phases, so she needs to investigate whether or not this goes ahead. But commentators like Pierre de Force have said that it is completely unlawful and irregular for him to then subpoena Gordhan to come to her office to answer questions. And his lawyer, Tebogo Malachi, has said, we have repeatedly tried to get the evidence from her to understand what exactly the case is that we're facing, and we haven't received that. We know Opus Sekhwale from the Public Protector's Office saying the meeting was cordial. Minister Gordhan provided the Public Protector with documentation and answered her questions. But at this stage, Public Protector yet to actually say concretely that she is in fact formally now investigating Gordhan.
All right, let's wait on that one. Karyn, can I have 30 seconds? I'm begging for 30 seconds because it's an important story. Yesterday I read this story, and it's got nothing to do with NPAs or anything like that. It's got to do with fake news. And it's a story that came out yesterday of two particular websites. It's a guy named William Mahlatse, a Ramatseba. He works at UNISA, believe it or not, and he's coming out with fake news stories, and they are absolutely fake news stories. Well, the website, mzansistories.com, allnews.co.za, and other information websites. And this was where the Dross story came in. And he posted a picture of, it was a black guy with a little white girl, and automatically started...
The assumption was...
Assumption, and race started getting involved, and everything started going wrong. And that wasn't the only story that this guy fabricated and put up on websites like this. Fake news, how bad is this at the moment?
It's a real problem, and unfortunately it's you know, obviously very problematic in the way that it promotes racial division, hatred. I mean, that story, people were outraged, understandably so, because the perpetrator was portrayed, it was like Meet the Dross Rapist, with this picture of a black man
who had absolutely
nothing to do with it. And of course, that prompted a whole rhetoric around why the media was not naming and showing the picture of the actual rapist at a time before he'd pleaded, which we know is, you know, according to Criminal Procedure Act, we're not allowed to do. But it came across that the media was pursuing a racist agenda in the way that it was reporting about that case. And that is incredibly problematic. I don't know how we police this stuff, but I think the thing is for the public to be aware. There are people who are consciously producing fake news. They're doing it for clicks, for money, for revenue, but they're also arguably doing massive damage to a country which is in already a very fragile state with regards to racial reconciliation. And these kind of things need to be interrogated by us as the public before we swallow them hook, line and sinker.
Yeah, I had to touch on that. Karyn Maughan, thank you very much for talking to us. It's something you have to be aware of. Don't just click and believe. Please read before you believe and start spreading these things. Karyn is a legal journalist at Tiso BlackStar, talking to us about the past week on the news front. Let's take a break. News after this.